Great Wednesday. Welcome to the new Healing America's Narratives podcast. Again, I'm your host, and I'm joined by my co-host Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Thank you for your work in creating this new name and backdrop for our podcast.
Yeah. So just give our listening audience who may be expecting the Fully Human Connections podcast that our theme is pretty much going to be similar. We decided to change the name because the topics we deal in are more apropos with Healing America's narratives. And right now we feel that that's more timely than ever. And Reggie was the author of the book Healing America's Narratives. And so we decided to go in that direction. So that's where most of our topics kind of stay within that realm. So with that being said, this is our first episode of Healing America's Narratives. I'm excited. Reggie, what's your spiritual energy number today?
Energy is at a 10 out of 10. I did not have to choose it. I've had pretty good energy with my work. I've been watching significant parts of the World Track and Field Championships from Tokyo. They're taking place this week in Tokyo, Japan. And I just love watching. I consider track and field like the basic athletic events. And in other words, there's limited equipment, except maybe in a pole vault and the shot put and stuff. And you just run faster, jump higher, or throw further. And, that's it. It comes down to those basic things. So I always enjoy watching the best in the world do that. Yes, that's actually helped me as well in the larger picture of what those old, wealthy, fat, mostly white men have been doing who aren't competing in athletics anymore and just killing people and making others' lives worse. It's refreshing to watch these, people in their 20s and 30s compete at the highest levels.
All right. And I'm a 10 as well. I join you at being a 10. Again, every day I'm alive and healthy. It gives me a 10. And once I go through my gratitude list, which I transition to that now, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for the problems and challenges in my life because through those, I gain wisdom and growth. This morning, a little, little congested a little bit. And finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that today is going to provide. So what about yourself, Reggie?
Yeah, so I'm grateful as always for my indoor plumbing and clear, mostly safe drinking water. Refrigerator is filled with food. Like all of my basic needs are met. I don't expect a luxury from this world. I'm not particularly motivated by having more and more things and great luxury, but I want to do good work and have my basic needs met. And they have been my entire life. I grew up, in a place where there was clean drinking water for the most part and two loving parents. And I know that puts me ahead of the game, with or without, financial wealth. So, and as you said, I'm grateful for my mostly functioning mind still, and my body seems to be working well at my age. And I just know that I'm more fortunate than the majority of people on the planet in terms of having my basic needs met. So I'm just I live in gratitude.
Excellent. All right. Well, launch us into our topic for our new show today.
Yeah. So just to provide the context, we've been at these conversations for over 3 years now. It was 3 years this past June. And as much as we've changed the title, and as you said, and the backdrop a bit, the conversations are staying the same. And we've been speaking about themes related to healing America's narratives. Most recently, and this is last week, we introduced the juxtaposition of one of the current United States administration's executive orders about ending the weaponization of the federal government. When that comes right out of Project 2025, and we pointed to you could say it's ironic, I would choose to say it's hypocritical, because they have this it's not funny because a lot of people are getting hurt, but they talked about ending the weaponization of the United States federal government. And since January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, Stephen Miller, Russell Vought, and others have done nothing but weaponize the federal government. Trump promised he would get retribution to his political enemies, and he's been doing that. So we introduced that last week. Today, I want to put two specific recent incidents on the table, each of which we could spend several weeks talking about. We're not going to do that. But just to show what I would describe as the insidiousness of saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to stop the weaponization because they did that to us. And the Biden administration really didn't do that. I mean, Trump was tried for things he had actually done. And there's blatant evidence of that. And now he's doing that very thing. So one is in one of the earliest moves that the Doge people made and the Trump administration made, I forget the exact date, but they got rid of a lot of U.S. attorneys. They wiped clean some U.S. attorneys who operate in all the states and different districts and just fired them without cause. And basically the cause, in these people didn't even get a meeting with their supervisor. They got an email from somebody in the Trump administration and said, effective immediately, your employment with the federal government is terminated. And the cause was given as Article 2 of the Constitution. So there was no actual cause. It was just basically Article 2 says the president has other powers as well as those explicitly given in the Constitution. And so basically it says because the president can do this, you're fired. And that's actually, you can read the memos. It says the cause is Article 2 of the Constitution. One of the United States attorneys who was fired is a woman named Maurene Comey, and she worked for the Southern District of New York State in Manhattan. And she was promoted over the last 15 or 20 years by both Republican and Democratic bosses. In her field of endeavor, she was considered one of the top prosecutors in the country. And she was involved in, among other cases, more recently, she led the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein, led the prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell, his girlfriend and co-conspirator in their pedophile work, and also in Sean Diddy Combs' prosecution. So those are just some of the high-profile cases, and she had hundreds of others over the years. Also, again, her name is Maurene Comey. She's also the daughter of the former director of the FBI, whom Donald Trump fired. Everybody probably remembers that name, James Comey. And so it's pretty clear that she did nothing wrong in her job to warrant being fired. Now, whether it was because she's Comey's daughter, one, whether because she prosecuted Trump's friends, Epstein and Maxwell, two, who knows? We don't know the why, but she was targeted without cause. And she did something that many of the other U.S. attorneys who were fired and many of the thousands of other federal employees that were fired didn't do. She filed a civil complaint against the Trump administration, against the Justice Department and others. And it's a very detailed complaint. I mean, just some of the language in it, and I'm not going to bore people with this because I don't understand it all myself. But she's claiming that her firing was a violation of the Constitution in Article 2. That basically on her job, and the president doesn't have the right to fire her personally because she's actually protected under the Congress and civil service provisions. And then there's a list of things: violation of the Administrative Procedure Act 5, violation of the ultra virus in violation of statutory authority. I mean, there's like 14 different claims she's making in this in this complaint against the federal government. Based on my listening to two former U.S. attorneys, unless the United States court system is completely taken over, as the Supreme Court seems to be, by Trump loyalists, there's no way she can lose this lawsuit because there was no cause for her to be fired. And all of the things she's claiming are true. They brought a lawsuit against somebody who knows the law better than they do. So that's one. It's a weaponization of the government in order to attack perceived enemies. The second one is, and this occurred this week or late last week, the president of the United States, and this is not the federal government doing this, this is Donald Trump doing this, is suing the New York Times for $15 billion in a defamation suit. And there are 4 reporters named who, wrote, did some research, published some articles, and then wrote a book about him, his history, his claims of being a self-made millionaire. And they've just refuted, they've just torn it all apart with investigative reporting. And the Times, unlike Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post, unlike the owner of the Los Angeles Times, unlike the owners of Paramount, unlike the owners of various other media corporations, the New York Times, people call it a leftist organization. It really isn't if you read it. It's the paper of national record. It's considered one of the best journalistic organizations in the world, and they're not going to back down. Their lawyer is basically saying it's a frivolous suit. So we're watching 2 cases now. There are hundreds of cases, counter cases against the Trump administration. But these 2, because of the prestige and the historical validity and credibility of the New York Times, when they make a mistake, they correct it in their own paper. They don't try to cover it up. Because it's against the New York Times, and because it's the other case against Maurene Comey, who was a U.S. attorney, whose father was a director of the FBI, and who is now fighting back. These 2 cases will put the court system, and they'll probably get to the Supreme Court, because if Comey wins and New York Times win, there will be appeals, and eventually they'll go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will be tested to see if they will back up a corrupt president who is weaponizing the government to punish people he perceives as political enemies. So if the Supreme Court in some way interferes and finds the New York Times guilty of defamation, all right, or finds that Maurene Comey was fired for good reasons, effectively the takeover of the government, all 3 branches, by an authoritarian regime will be complete. Not that there aren't more court cases out there, but these 2 are really important. So I'm going to stop there and let you chime in. And again, I have both of the cases kind of open on my desktop here so I can say more specific things. But again, I'm still learning the legal aspects of them because I'm not a lawyer, and I'm just paying attention to a broad swath of what's going on. And this weaponization, and these 2 particular cases of weaponization seem to be really front and center now, amid all the other crazy shit that's going on.
Well, Bob, again, I want to thank you for choosing another topic that I believe is timely, necessary, and important. And my initial take is it's kind of what you already talked about in your book, Healing America's Narratives, Becoming More Fully Human. That when you look at the track record, the pattern, the behaviors, to me is very similar to, if you do a little research, you can find out it's very similar to tactics that have been used before, repeatedly. That's why important it is to understand history. That's why I believe the Republican mega party in power doesn't want people to look at history, not just erasure of Black history, trying to make Blacks irrelevant, but so they can repeat it. they can do things, and people won't realize that when they see these same things happen again, these same behaviors, they won't be able to link it to anything if they don't understand history and the dummy dime of America. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. And I'm going to bring it back to those weaponization of the federal government, what Trump is doing, and what Project 2025 agenda is. You go back and you study history, just two incidents in particular, the Tulsa race riots and the Rosewood um, atrocities were both 1921, 1923, respectively. And in both situations, there was accusations, there was falsifications stated, there were uh, in those cases, it was white women saying that they were attacked or looked at or raped by black men, and so that was a justification. And so what I'm saying is that same pattern happening now, where you have the killing of Charlie Kirk, and then still Trump them doubling down and saying that the Democrats, the left did it. It's the left. It's the same accusations. It's still the same way of riling up his race. The difference now is that the federal government is going to be complicit and launching it, as opposed to just local governments at those times in those cities. But it's the same. It's the same behaviors, the same thought patterns to me, showing that. And Project 2025 was just put in place to make sure that this time around, when Trump won, no one really, I don't believe people really expected Trump to win. That's why there was no really plan for him in office during that time. And so we saw just him winning just off hate and using hate and divisive tactics, and basically stealing the election in 2016, in my opinion, because he lost the popular vote. That Project 2025 saw that, okay, when Trump gets back in office, we're gonna have a plan. There's not gonna be this confusion of what he's not gonna do. We're gonna just come in office with a plan, following Steve Bannon's strategy of just filling, as you say, you quoted Steve Bannon several times, filling the pipeline or the media circuit with shit, and just really putting so much stuff happening that people can't keep up with what's really going on while they pass legislation that's harmful to um, the justice and freedom of most American citizens outside of white men, white Christian men in particular. So that's what I really look at as the hidden roots or the elements of the representation of the federal government. Again, Trump, the playbook they're using is the things they accuse Biden of, they're doing. The things they accuse the left of, they're doing. You know, saying that, well, there's attack on freedom of speech, and yet and still, that's all they're doing. Then they have the nerve to say they're free speech champions, but yet and still, but I remember George Clinton back in the 80s had this concert that he was doing. And he was saying this back in the 70s as well, but I got a chance to see him in the 80s. And I remember it was a little banner I got from a concert, little um, kind of like a little cloth banner. And it said, freedom of speech, but watch what you say. It was saying that way back in 1980s. And he was saying that. And that's where we are today is freedom of speech, but watch what you say. And if you say something that's against their agenda, their political uh, policies, then they're going to weaponize the government to come after you. And that's what we're seeing. And, Pam Bundy had the nerve to say now, after everything Charlie Kirk said, and just him and all the other right wing, I'm going to stop using the term right wing. I think that's the problem. We get the folks who are not on the right wing, we get caught up in trying to always be civil and say things that are considered to be of they have some factual basis, and that's where our position. But it doesn't work. When you're arguing facts against people's opinions, people who are on the so-called right wing side just says whatever they want. They call it woke and then bundle everything in the woke. Doesn't make sense, but that's their brand. That's what they do. Folks who are not in that camp try to come and use politically correct terms, and we are dealing in a society at a time where we're trying to have rules and regulations within chaos. And that to me is now becoming to be an exercise in futility. So I'm gonna call it what it is. From my point forward, it's the white supremacists, and that's who they behaving at. That's who they're behaving like. And if we start using that type of language and calling it for what they are, instead of far right, see, it's no longer just really a political divisiveness when people say that. When you have Steve Miller on Fox News stating that the left Democrats need to die and they're not American and they should be locked up and attacked, and he's calling for that. We've gone beyond just political divisiveness, and see the media has been very complicit in that as well, because they've always tried to make it say, well, both sides do this and both sides do that, and it's not even a fair comparison at all. And you have one side that's really advocating for white supremacy, white power, white control. That's it, simple as that. And the other side is saying, well, we want everyone to be fair and treated equally. That's what they say. And they've been attacked by being radical. And Trump's turned the radical left, the woke left. See, the point I'm making is that the historical patterns show, and it's even what's happening in Gaza. The playbook is always, I'm going to dehumanize you, first of all. You're a monster. You're evil. You're terrorist. You're all these, anything but human. So we're going to continue to put that in the zeitgeist, continue to put that in the media cycle, continue to put that. So then it becomes to the point where their base is saying it, their politicians are saying it, the media is quoting them saying it. And so once you look at someone that's being non-human, then it's acceptable that you can do atrocities to them and violence and take away justice and their rights, and people won't fight for it who are not in that bank or in that marginalized group, because they're looked at as inhuman, like prisoners. People who are in prison, and you hear about all the horrific conditions of what prisons like, and we say, well, they're prisoners, so they must be there. So they understand very clearly how continue to put the propaganda out there, continue to put things out there like what the left is doing. They put that out there with those accusations, then they follow up with their actions. And so to me, this is just a repeat pattern of that. And that's why I believe, and that's why, our behind the scenes, I wanted to talk with you about as we name our show, because I think it's more important that we look at understanding the history and the atrocities that you talk about in your book. It's so important nowadays to really understand that, so folks can make the connection to that. They can really understand where we're going. That this is not just some offshoot, and that if we win again or Democrats get Republicans out of office, and I hate to say that they're forcing me into the camp where I have to vote Democrat, because the Republicans have no backbone. There's no politicians there who I can respect that's going to do anything of justice. So we got to put the lesser of two evils, Democratic Party, back in office. And we've seen what they've done throughout the years. But at least there's some civility there with their actions. And that's where we got to choose between. But finally, I conclude my point by saying that the weaponization of the Justice Department and them putting it in the zeitgeist and constantly putting it in the media right now and using their tactics is to test the temperature to see how people feel about it, but then actually implement that to the fullest extent. And I think we're still only 9 months into Trump's second presidency, that it's going to just get worse before it gets better. And we're going to see the weaponization come with even shows like this. I think that, we may even get pulled because of some things we're saying that they're watching, because Pam Bundy clearly came out and said, we're going after everybody. Anybody who we feel is saying anything that we figure to be their term weaponization. Marco Rubio is trying to pull people's citizenships and visas because of his opinion of what he feels they're saying. So bottom line is there's a complete evil agenda that we're seeing them carry out. And again, my question is going to be, or I conclude my my first take by saying, how far are we going to allow folks to pull this rubber band before it snaps?
Yeah, no, I mean, well said. Couple of things come up. Uh, One is that, interestingly, which and quite surprisingly, and this is not, I hate to give to give kudos, but when Bondi said that, among the, everybody obviously in the Democratic Party pushed back, but among those who pushed back included Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, who I have no respect or like for. He basically said that's not how the First Amendment works. So he pushed back against Bondi, and so did the Fox. This guy, I know his name. I don't know what show he's on Fox News. Britt Hume basically said that's not how the First Amendment works. So she's got some pushback from the um, otherwise Trump supporting right, who, in a moment of weakness, I guess, they realized that she was saying things as Attorney General of the United States. She was saying things that, in fact, were not constitutional. We're going to come after you because we don't like what you're saying. So with that, one of the things that's really clear to me is what the Trump administration did in the first month of their term was, remove all kinds of language from the federal websites that had anything to do with women's rights or gay rights or any kind of minority rights. So, the number of words that were removed is crazy. So right there is the government is violating First Amendment by doing that. It's not funny. But then the second thing is what Bondi and all of the folks on the Republican side of the aisle right now are saying after the shooting of Charlie Kirk, who was a anti-gay, anti-women's rights, anti-trans provocateur. I don't want him to be shot because I've been speaking against gun violence for more than a decade. But when they started, employers were firing people for expressing their opinions about his hateful rhetoric. They were trying to control what was okay to say and what wasn't okay. And the irony of that, and this actually is funny, if we're not talking about people getting shot or people getting fired and losing their livelihoods, none of that is funny. But that's the very foundational element of wokeness that the right opposed on the left. That's where the left made their worst mistakes. In universities, in some corporations, a lot of different places, they tried to say it's not okay to say this. And their intentions were good because the speech that they were trying to ban was typically racist, sexist, homophobic speech, where people would be intimidated because of their skin pigmentation, because of their gender, or because of their sexual orientation. But still, they were trying to control speech. And they went too far with that because either you believe in free speech or you don't. And the Supreme Court ruled, I forget the name of the case now, I'm not going to try to remember it, but the First Amendment is especially important when speech is mean-spirited or hateful. The speech that's not protected is speech that is that's threatening speech, threatening to do harm, or that puts people in danger. The soft example of that is you can't falsely yell fire in a crowded theater because people will then panic and run and somebody might get hurt. But there's other examples where you can't use speech to threaten somebody. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to do this because of blah, 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 blah. That's not protected speech. But saying you don't like women or you don't like white men or you don't like trans people is protected speech. And so when people began quoting Charlie Kirk saying, here's what he said in this situation, here's what he said in this situation, he was promoting hate. The people who were pointing to his speech and saying he was promoting speech, they were getting shut down by the Trump administration for saying he was promoting hate. They weren't saying anything mean. They were pointing to facts. So there's this whole flip where the very thing that the right was criticizing the left for in terms of trying to control speech the Trump administration is doing at an exponential level. So it's just, it's out of 1984 again. Say one thing and mean the opposite, or protest against something and then do it and say that you're not doing it. It's right out of George Orwell. And then the last thing I'll say, and I know it's almost time for us to do our sponsorship, but maybe what we can do starting next week is go back to the historical and foundational elements of Healing America's Narratives, the book, and just to kind of restate those things, because we've been at it for 3 years. And if we have any new folks coming into the conversation, it might be good for them to hear those foundational elements, because as you said, they're just being repeated. And the shadow of the United States, I'll just give this one hint and we can unpack it more next week. The shadow of the United States is dominated by unhealthy, group-centric, us against them, unhealthy masculine energy. That's the underside, the underbelly, the worst of this country that's denied by tens of millions of people, is an unhealthy, group-centric, us versus them masculine energy that tries to subjugate, hurt, and deny the rights of other human beings. Historically, those human beings were women, Africans, and indigenous peoples. And then they became women, indigenous peoples, and African Americans. And nowadays, I mean, those three groups are still included, even though some progress has been made. But nowadays, there's more Latinos, Muslims, gay, trans, and bi people. Those are people who aren't really human in the eyes of the white, Christian nationalist, white supremacist movement, which is the Bible of which is Project 2025, and the leader of which, even though he would never have done this on his own, because he didn't care enough about it, as long as he makes his money and seen as the guy in charge, he doesn't really care about what the agenda is. If the left had invited him in and said, you could help us do this, and gave him some money, he would have done that. Because he has no real underlying integrity or worldview other than to be in charge and to be seen as a smart guy with lots of money. Maybe we can move in that direction in coming weeks, but I'll put a pin in that right now.
All right, so now it's a good time for our break. We'll take our break for our sponsor, and we'll continue on the other side.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back to Healing America's Narratives. I'm your host, King. This is Reggie, and our second half of our show. Reggie, I want to piggyback on a couple of things you said. First of all, you left off your Charlie Kirk description, racist, because he said a lot of racist things about Black women not having the brain power, and that Black, he was talking about Black crime on crime, and then finally about Black pilots, that if he saw a Black pilot on a plane, he would question whether or not the pilot had the competence and the experience to fly the plane safely. So now, and then Washington Post fired the reporter Karen Atea for, as you said, reposting Charlie Kirk's comments in her editorial. 11 years she worked at the Washington Post, and she was fired for just doing that, not coming up and giving her opinion, actually putting his quotes in her editorial, and that got her fired. So that just really shows you the complicity of the media, as I said before, in this landscape. Again, majority of media, not all media, but the big players, the ones that most people listen to and watch. So you have to watch the smaller media channels such as Democracy Now, NPR, Zateo, those type of media outlets to really get true unbiased news. And they're called left-leaning because they don't just come out and just give us propaganda. I was watching a movie last night, and I've been trying my best to catch it, and I suggest you catch it before it leaves. You may have already seen it, but it's so apropos for right now. It's called Idiocracy. It came out in 2005 by the creators of Beavis and Butthead, Mike Judge. And when you watch that movie right now, it's a satirical movie. If you don't understand Beavis and Butthead and his type of humor, then this movie falls right in line with that. But it's so apropos for right now because basically the premise is that intelligent people stop having babies because they don't want to bring them into the world unless the conditions are right. But the unintelligent, the hillbillies, are the ones that are still having babies at a foundational level. So eventually they surpass the intelligent people, and all the offspring are the ones that inherit the earth, are the ones who are unintelligent, and they create pretty much a stupid world. And the stupid world operates off just idiots who run the world. And then they have a person who becomes president who is this figure who's a reality star, has a lot of wrestling symbolism in it. I mean, it's like he pretty much wrote his own George Orwell 1984 in that. So I definitely recommend people catch it before it gets taken offline, because that's the world we live in right now. It's on Prime. So again, I don't trust Prime to keep that kind of content out there nowadays, because that's the environment we live in. But I mention that only because of the fact it shows you, and we talked about this before, when I said, going back to Carlos Castellao's description of stupid, not stupid being an insult, saying someone's ignorant, but just people who behave in activities that doesn't benefit them or anyone, and they still behave in those activities. So that's what shows you. That movie shows you the extent of what happens when stupid people actually inherit the earth in the world. And so when you look at the landscape right now with social media, that's what you see. You see people constantly, and I was just reading these posts, and I realized I'm telling myself I'm gonna stop doing it, because again, I realize as an engineer, there's no value in it unless I'm going to write a book about it or do some political analysis. But unless I'm doing that, there's really no value putting that into my mind and digesting that type of information. But my point is, when I was reading the comments of folks prior to Charlie Kirk's assassinator being identified and captured, they were swearing it was left-leaning. They wouldn't have been surprised it was a Black trans woman. That would have been the perfect person in the right's mind, for the white supremacist mind, that should have shot Charlie Kirk. But when they found out it wasn't, there was someone who's father was born in Utah, whose father was MAGA and Republican, you know, they still blame them anyway, which is why I compared that to Rosewood. It's like, it doesn't matter if the white woman was raped or not. The fact is, we're going to behave like she was. And that's what they're doing. We're going to behave like someone that a black trans woman who was Mexican and biracial and a legal immigrant, all of us both, bundled into one person did the shooting. We're going to behave like that. So my point is, when I was reading people who didn't switch, who didn't say, "Oh, I was wrong," and we need to tone down the political rhetoric, then it really clicked that again, these are just excuses. We just need something to trigger. Because I even told folks, even before he was identified, I said, the killer of Charlie Kirk, I'm speaking of, that who benefits the most from Charlie Kirk's death? The left doesn't benefit. There's no, it's not like you stop his message and he's just gone and no one else is going to. Having Charlie Kirk death or being shot the way he did, he was going to be martyred by the right. So they benefited from it. We're going to get folks to be, it's going to ramp up the rhetoric 10x. And now we see the Justice Department is going to actually be weaponized against folks who come out against it. So to me, it's clear that it benefited the white supremacists for Charlie Kirk to be killed, right? And that's what's clear. And I even said that before his killer was identified, that regardless of the race of his killer. See, again, going back throughout history, there is never going to be a united, uniform consensus, because that's how America operates. There's the way John F. Kennedy was killed. There's no consensus on his death. There's no consensus on Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, how he was killed. There's no unified, this is what's accepted and everybody agrees. So that was always going to be the case. That's how America operates. We don't get clearly say, this is what happened. We know for a fact, and just stick with that. To your point of your book and to the point of our podcast now, everything in America is about the narrative. Everything's about the narrative. So the narrative now is, so that's the environment that this kid was in. And Trump even said on Fox News, the president of the United States, he was radicalized by the woke left. So even though he had great parents, he said his parents was great. Now, no other parents are going to be referred to as being great and good parents who raised a killer. No one else has ever done that. But Trump got on TV and actually said that because, again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who the killer was. Can we leverage that situation for our agenda is all that matters. And the answer, and we see that happening now, the answer is yes. We saw the incompetency of the FBI when they couldn't find the killer, and Cash Patel was out there just putting statements out. And that's another thing that's in the Idiocracy movie, and I'll say this quickly then in my second take, is that the cabinet for the president were folks like reality stars, cousins, these people who were just friends of the president that had no experience whatsoever, but they were in these vital positions. And because of that, the world was in a dust bowl. There was crops not being grown anymore. Corporations had taken over the world, and they actually had advertisements, even in court. You go into a courtroom and there's advertisements and corporation advertisements and banners all throughout the courtroom. So it just shows you and you thought back in 2005, that's just crazy. We'll never get there, but we're getting there now. We're getting to the point where I wouldn't be surprised, maybe not in my lifetime, but definitely if you have a millennial or a Generation Z in their lifetime, for sure, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw corporations being advertised and banners and posters inside courtrooms. And the corporations actually brought up all the government buildings as well. That's how much power corporations had. So they brought up the government buildings and renamed those government buildings. So for him to have that kind of insight of where we can go, and now seeing what the world we're living in. I even did a Google, I'll conclude on this point. I did a Gemini search on my phone. I said, how is the conditions and the things expressed in Idiocracy similar to today? And it literally came out and said on AI that because of the political environment, the way the media is used, the way social media is used and weaponized is very similar. So it's crazy that that movie came out and that's never get talked about. It got totally dismissed, and it's really like a cult classic for the people in the know. But I definitely recommend everyone read it or watch it. I'm sorry, before it gets taken off the airways and streaming platforms, so you can really see the direction we're going in, and it won't be as silly and as funny as it was in 2005. I'll assure you.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, I've actually never seen that movie. I've looked at the thumbnail a few times and just decided, okay, I mean, yeah, it looks like it would be interesting and funny. But now with your recommendation, I will take a look. I wanted just in my probably would be my almost next to last comment here is just to bring this back to the core of how we began today with this weaponization of the government. And you and I are, I think, 15 or so years apart age wise. We grew up in different parts of the country. You grew up as a black man. I grew up as a white man. What I don't like to, I'm second generation Italian American. We weren't completely white, but kind of know what that means. But the very essence of the best of this country, that which in fits and starts from 1776 forward, recognized its flaws and used the ability to amend the Constitution when necessary, which is a lost art now. The Republicans don't want to amend the Constitution. They say that's done. This is the law of the land. We don't want to change anything, and it really needs amendment. But to the point, the institutions, flawed and biased as they were at the conception and birth of this country, worked hard over 200 years. And we're at almost 250 now, but I'll say 200 years, maybe 225, in fits and starts to make it better, to give rights where there weren't rights, to correct to everything from the 19th Amendment. I'm not even going to mention the 13th, 14th, and 15th, in the 1860s and 1870s. And the institutions that were able to do that because good people worked hard at it and really were serious about inviting everyone who was a U.S. citizen into this conversation. That infrastructure and the cultural beliefs that built it are in the process of being destroyed right now. And so that for me is the big difference. There is this repetition of white, basically men, but white supremacists wanting this to be a white Christian nation. And I agree 100% with that. The big difference now in the last 8.5, 9 months is that not only are they're not just trying to stop the passage of reasonable laws that help people. They're breaking apart, as Steve Bannon said, burn the whole thing down. That's what they're doing. And so the ability to continue to do good for people is what's being challenged now. They're trying to make it into a government that doesn't care about anyone outside of their in-group. And the good news that I see is they are a significant minority. It is the tyranny of the minority, to quote that phrase in the title of the book by Levitsky and Zablat. And every time Bernie Sanders just got done in West Virginia and talking to a bunch of poor white folks mainly, not only, who were all Trump supporters. And he's going state by state, building the coalition, not of Republican versus Democrat, but of people who want a fair shake versus people who don't give a damn if you have a fair shake. And there are way more people in this country. This is my optimism. There are way more people in this country, whether they declare themselves Democrats, independents, libertarians, or Republicans, There are way more people in this country who really do want everyone to have a fair shake and don't want to see a handful of people take all the spoils. And that's my hope. But they have to get loud. They have to get into the streets. They have to make it really clear when they vote, and they have to vote, that what's going on now is not acceptable. Because ultimately, if the Trump and Project 2025 movement succeeds, it's a failure of the American people who refused to take advantage of a democratic process, imperfect though it was, would include them if they would at the very least vote every time there was an election, local, state, or national. And the better part of 40% of the country does not do that. And that's an embarrassment. It's humiliating. It's a shame. And so if this gets burnt down, it's all of our faults. And even though you and I work at not burning it down, the American people have failed to practice democracy. It's not easy. It's not fair at times, but it's gotten better, through the 2010s. It got better. It got increasingly inclusive, and it's going the opposite direction at a high rate of speed right now. I'll shut up.
Well, and I want to say this in my closing point is that, again, I want people to understand that the engineer, and I always say the engineer in me because you understand my context of how I think and how I process. I'm a critical thinker. So I use that label to state that. That's where I'm going with that. It's that because as an engineer, you have to be trained to think critically. And in doing so, my basis comes down to this. Once you really understand that race is a construct and that we only are suffering for the folks who identify, not white people who identify as white are in power and don't want to lose power. So they don't want to lose land and resources or power. That's where all this comes down to. And that's what we're seeing. And everything else is just coming up from that crux of that situation. So when people whose skin color and that's why we got to get away from defining things by race and get under being fully human, because when you choose that as your identity as opposed to your race, now it's no longer us against them, and we can begin to single out and show the true minority who they are. For the folks who don't want to do that, they should not be in power once the ones who become fully human do. So I just want to use that as my last take. I'm going to give you the opportunity now to kind of give us a summation of how, again, for folks who may be coming in late, we changed the name of the show from being Fully Human Connections to Healing America's Narratives based on Reggie's book. But you see the subtitle of our show is Becoming More Fully Human. So as his book talks about, and as Reggie has talked about, we're still going to always bring it back to the solution that's to be fully human. So Reggie's going to give us some practical guidance on that now in that space.
Yeah, this is a tough one since the best and the brightest are flailing away trying to guide us out of this. But yeah, I would say all of us have some essence of group or us centrism, in-group belonging. I belong to these groups and not those groups. It's inevitable for human beings. Many of us aspire to, or even have succeeded at, seeing ourselves as part of the human species as opposed to this or that group. So the practical, and I've probably said this before, but the practical guidance for the next week is when you read a news article, if you listen to a news commentator, God forbid, if you listen to a politician, somebody who holds public office, if you're trying to make a smart decision or a good decision, look for the group biases. And I would argue, forget about Republican and Democratic left and right language. I mean, you can use that, but it just gets in the way because it's almost meaningless depending on who uses it. I would argue, listen for the language of those people who care about all human beings. No exceptions. You can care about human beings and still believe in the rule of law. So if somebody hurts somebody, mugs them or rapes them or kills them, they're entitled to due process. They're found guilty. They go to jail. You're still caring about all human beings. So we're not saying everything goes. We're saying you believe that everyone has equal rights. And let's even just keep it in the United States for now, but although it's important to extend it everywhere. So the two groups, in conflict now are those who believe in the dignity of every human being and those who don't. And the folks running the United States federal government right now do not believe in the dignity of every human being. So forget Democrat, forget Republican, forget left, forget right, forget all of that, conservative and liberal. You believe in human dignity for everybody, or you don't. Which group are you in? Give yourself a test. Right? That's the work you have to do. And then next time you vote for the people who believe in the dignity of all human beings.
Excellent.
And I hear an amen, brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. I'm the first to say amen, because I think what you just laid out is really the solution. I think that's key. It's not only key to having a better environment that's less stressful and one of anxiety and wondering whether or not who's going to be killed and watching the political violence and all those things, but it's also because it's going to help you live a healthier life. And that's what people don't realize. You're cheating yourself having all this hatred for someone else and all this bias and this bigotry. And so that's going to roll right into who I want to use and lift up as my person of, as we move into our next segment, we talk about identifying someone we believe who is exhibiting the qualities and behaviors of being fully human, or past or present. So with that being said, because we don't want to make sure that we're not just talking about something that's impossible to do or to obtain or to be. People have lived this way and are currently living this way. And so with that being said, my choice, who I want to give flowers to, is Abraham Lincoln. And that shows my growth mindedness in this as well, because I wouldn't have chosen great Abraham Lincoln as someone who I admired years ago, mainly because when I learned that his vision on whether he freed the slaves or not was not based on his moral belief that slavery was wrong. It was he would have done anything to save the Union. So he just did it as a strategy maneuver, and that's what I was taught, and that's what I believed, and I held him in contempt, so to speak, in my mind, as far as being truly a moral person based off that. And I realized in my own growth that I was wrong. So quickly, let me say why in these 6 pillars. That's why it's important to understand when we talk about people being fully human, they're not perfect. We're not saying to be fully human, you're going to be perfect and you got to always do things in perfection. No, it's that at the end of the day, you choose humanity more than not, and you live a life of someone who we can admire in that context. So my 6 pillars with Abraham Lincoln quickly are: number 1, as you know, identity. Lincoln anchored his identity in civil dignity and unity. Growth mindset. Again, even though he wasn't a person who believed that slavery should end for moral reasons, he used it for strategic reasons. It's still the fact he did it, and that showed growth and his willingness to sit down with Frederick Douglass and welcome him at the White House and look at ways to improve the country from his teachings and his cultural givens. Higher purpose and service. His North Star was preserving the Union and expanding freedom. If we had a president in place now that had that as a thought process, we'd be a much better country. Core principles. He fused constitutional duty with moral vision. He had a grateful spirit. He connected with gratitude and empathy and repair. And then his self-awareness, he practiced reflective leadership. So I want to lift up Abraham Lincoln as my example of someone being fully human.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love the way you applied the 6 pillars there to him with the caveat of what you used to think about him. So that's actually beautiful. Thank you for that. I'm going to go for somebody I may have referred to him before, but I just heard him speak recently. So I'm going to kind of reflect on this. I was listening to some of the subcommittee hearings when they called in Kash Patel, the FBI director now, And I listened specifically to Cory Booker's conversation with him. And Patel just has no respect for anybody. He just argues and doesn't answer questions. And Booker, was I thought rightfully harsh. But then he said, he finished by saying, I think this might be the last time you and I have a conversation like this in a committee hearing, because Donald Trump is not loyal to people. He demands loyalty, but he's not loyal to people. And some of your behavior is causing him problems. And I don't think you're long for your job. So I'm going to pray for you. And he wasn't being sarcastic. I mean, Booker really means this. He has a Buddhist practice, and he can go after people. It's a smart guy. But he was able to say that, on the record, to a guy that was showing him no respect. Patel was just making, he wouldn't answer questions. He was sarcastic. And so I just want to, honor Cory Booker, who, I think shows up in a really fully human way.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And my growth mindedness has to come where I want to give him those same flowers. I'm not ready yet, but again, I have to be growth minded and become more fully human. And that's a learning process. So thank you again, Reggie, for choosing that. And again, folks, that's just showing you real time. Yeah. No one's perfect. And who we choose to honor as being fully human, as long as they choose humanity most of the time in their actions and their behaviors, to me, that's what we want to lift up. So thank you for listening to our first show of Healing America's Narratives. We're going to still replace the time slot of Fully Human Connections, which is 10 a.m. Reggie and I will still be the same. Again, we're always going to close the show with how to become more fully human, because his book talks about that. And that's why I really want to make sure we emphasize the importance of reading his book now more than ever, because you have to understand historical legacy to see the pattern. You can't just look at what's happening today in a silo and just think that, well, that's not going to happen or this can't happen. You have to understand what has happened, how it has happened repeatedly, so you can see the actual system. So with that being said, until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's continue to be all fully human.